I'm Eric Weissman from Centrifuge. Welcome to the kickoff of the Centrifuge Startup Series. Something we're rebooting this year. For those of you who aren't aware, Centrifuge is about a 8-year-old organization. I'm fortunate enough to have been on the founding team. So I like to say I was here when we were making things up. We're still making things up in pure startup fashion, but one of the things that has always been a tenet of Centrifuge is to provide and foster entrepreneurship and provide startups with that path to their next lily pad, wherever they needed to be in their journey. We just want to keep them moving forward, and part of that is education, right? Training, getting exposed to things that you don't know or things that are relatively new, and demystifying those. And one of the most important, well, let me back up a little bit. So we're organizing the startup series along 6 major themes or tracks this year. And those are the voice of the customer, business acumen and operations, financials, sales, growth and marketing, leadership / professional development, and fundraising, asking for money. And that's one of the primary things that we see when we're talking about tech and tech-enabled startups that want to know what that path is like, and want to know how hard or how easy is this going to be as we walk down this path, whether you're looking for a friends and family round or Series C investors. That's where Centrifuge comes in through across our broad network of support that we want to provide that help to get you to that next lily pad in your journey. So a couple things that I want to just drop in the chat here. I mentioned that we have a series of events coming up. I'm going to link out to those right now in the chat window and show everybody. So this is how to stay in touch with all of the events that we have planned. You'll see our next one is in early March around female founders. That is coinciding with, I'm going to screw this up, Catherine, but is it Women Entrepreneurs Day?
International Women's Day is March 8th, and
Great.
we're holding a female founders panel on March 11th.
Great. So that is the next one. But if you look through that chart, you can see that we've got people from LPK, a gentleman from PitchBook is helping us. I'm going to be on the phone later on this afternoon with some folks from the Talent Magnet Institute to talk about their training session. We're going to talk about pricing. We're going to talk about leadership development, a lot of different things that we have heard over the years that startups are clamoring for and kind of wanting to continue their education, whether you've gone through an accelerator, want to go through an accelerator, think of it like that, a sort of finishing school or continuing education. So that's the Centrifuge Startup Series. Then I want to make a plug for Centrifuge membership. So if you know or are a tech or tech-enabled founder that is looking for that type of help, the link is in the chat for Centrifuge membership, to get access to programming such as this, to get on our radar, to get connected to talent, customers, and money that startup founders need to continue on their journey. Consider that investment, modest investment, $150 a year. It's really a bargain from a Centrifuge membership standpoint. And then my final plug is on co-working. And let me put this chat up. So Union Hall, where I'm calling you out of right now, the remote working headquarters of Greater Cincinnati. We've got ample space, ample phone booths for people to work when you're tired of listening to your dogs bark or wrestling for space on the kitchen table or in your office at home. We are right in the middle of Over the Rhine in downtown Cincinnati, and we actually get a fair amount of traffic nowadays. I'm really impressed with how that's picking up, and some of the the good signs that we're seeing on the immediate horizon. So things have slowed down in the waiting room, so I'm going to turn this over to Blake who I've known Blake for a number of years. He can go over his bio a lot more than I can, but this has always been one of the more popular sessions that we have had either in Centrifuge Startup Series past or Startup Cincy Week. Blake has a lot of experience, and I really appreciate how he packages up the information in a very consumable fashion. And he's been there. He's been in a lot of your seats and can provide great perspective. So we'll try to wrap this up in about an hour. So we would like to make this interactive. I'll be monitoring the chat, and we'll look to ask you some questions and have some questions from you. But Blake, are you all ready to go?
Yeah, I think so. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. And then when you
Great.
try to share your screen, I'll just flip that over. But thanks everybody for coming. Okay.
Cool.
Thanks everybody for coming, and Blake, take it away.
All right, sounds good. Just be forewarned, I have 5 children in this home, and they all are directly above me. So I'm using quick plug Krisp.ai, which is supposed to eliminate background noise. But if there's too much noise, somebody just ping me and let me know, and I can shout out there or start hitting the ceiling with a broom handle or something. So, welcome to 2020. So cool. Can you see my screen, everybody? Yes. Eric, yes. Yep, good. All right, cool. Oh, actually, let me see if you can do it when I hit play. Let's see here. Got it? Yes, good. All right, cool. Well, hey everybody, it's nice to meet you. My name is Blake, and today we're going to talk about, I'm going to try to knock this out in the next 20 to 25 minutes, talking about how to raise money with less traction. And the reason I chose this specifically is I've been working with a lot of founders, specifically on fundraising, and I've got 200 or 300 folks on my email list. So I blasted it out to everybody and said, hey, what's the #1 problem that you have when it comes to fundraising? And what I found was this was the #1 question that most people had, is how to raise money when you have a little bit less traction, that early stage raise. And maybe more specifically, how to raise money when you keep hearing from investors, come back to me when you have a little bit more traction, right? And so this is specifically what I want to try to solve today. A little bit of background on me, hopefully. Let's see if this turns over. Yeah, so I'm Blake. I'm currently CEO of a software company that we're self-funding called JumpDocs.com. And so what we're doing with JumpDocs is specifically serves founders in the early stage from a legal and financial structuring standpoint. So what we do is essentially, we'll actually form your Delaware C Corp, manage your cap table, get all the legal documents necessary from a founder standpoint, as well as early hires at about 1/10 the cost that you would normally pay with a law firm. The way we're doing that is actually by partnering with law firms. So essentially softwareizing their early stage practice while not losing that personal touch. I've formerly, for the past decade, I've been the CEO of Cladwell.com. And with that, we raise friends and family, like 300K or 350 from friends and family with no traction whatsoever, just in a spreadsheet. We then went on and raised another $500,000 with very limited traction from the Cincinnati area, and with angels primarily. And then we raised another 800 with a couple VCs as well as more angels here, and then raised a $2 million round in Silicon Valley after going through 500 startups, and then rounded it out to another 4, or in total 4 at with Science Incorporated, based out of Santa Monica. And so through that process, I've received formal training on fundraising, specifically from both 500 startups and Science Incorporated. And then I've personally had to raise about 30 million myself. And then last year, I actually started coaching founders, and I coached 8 founders last year in the process of raising institutional funding, so like 1.5 or more, and had a 75% hit rate. So 6 out of the 8 were able to succeed in raising an institutional round, which I will brag slightly is 4 points better than Y Combinator's hit rate. And so I felt pretty good about that, because I didn't take 7 points of the companies in order to do that. So, and these pictures here, I wanted to share those just to show, like, hey, these each kind of represent a highly stressful point in my time, in my life, of trying to raise funding to keep the company alive. We had a pretty big team from day one. And so there's bottom left is me and my family with my kids, actually walking through the San Francisco airport, where we moved out there for 6 months to raise a round. There's me pitching at 500 startups. There's me head down doing about 6 pitches a day while we were living in Mountain View. trying to close a round. And then every night I'd end, there's my wife sitting on the couch. We'd lie down on opposite couches with a glass of wine, listen to a record, and fret about the future of our life as a family and the future of the business. And I will say, in all of that, I don't regret any bit of it. It's been hugely instrumental to me, my growth as a person. And I think there's no better use of your time to expose yourself to a true market that will give you market feedback as to, the clarity of your thought and the strategy that you're doing. And so I highly encourage anybody who's looking to raise money to do a venture-backed startup, do it. Pretty much as long as you stay moral and ethical, you literally can't lose. You'll leave the process, whether win or fail, you'll leave the process with much more market value, and you'll grow a lot as a person. So, all right, jumping in, let's talk about the current investment landscape. Right now, there are a couple things have changed really in the past year that I've kind of seen through 2020. The biggest one is that venture capital and startups have become far more dispersed in the past year. This is good news for people like us in Cincinnati, because suddenly VCs that are based in San Francisco or were based in San Francisco will answer our emails. I remember explicitly having people 5 years ago respond to my emails, say, if I can't walk to my board meeting, I'm not interested, which I think was very small-minded, but that's no longer the case. With COVID, I mean, we see a lot of VCs who are moving to Austin, a lot who are moving to Miami. And so because of that, it's shifting the game, I'd say, in the positive way for founders outside of Silicon Valley. The problem with that is it also means that it's much more crowded. It's 2020, there were more Delaware C Corps formed in 2020 than in the history of mankind, is the most ever. So there are more companies forming, but that's actually not as much of the issue. I think it's more that now VCs are entertaining investment from people outside of Silicon Valley. So it seems to them like the world has just exploded. And so it's less of it's kind of like when you shine a flashlight in a room. The room doesn't get bigger when you shine it on things, but suddenly it feels bigger to you because now you can see more of the world. I'd say that's kind of the current experience of a lot of VCs. And angel investors too. This is not only specific to VC. And then finally is that there's a natural gravity to go upstage, right? So people who start as a pre-traction, pre-product investor, if they're good, they're going to naturally move up to Series A or later on. And the reason for that is that's mathematically a good idea. It's less risk further on, and so if you can get into deals later on, it does tend to de-risk, and the return doesn't. It makes sense, but this causes a problem for us as founders, right? And specifically, I got these quotes from founders that I reached out to in preparation for this. So these are a couple of the questions that people had. One is, how do I find investors that are willing to invest pre-product, right? It's hard to find. Where are these people? Two, how do I get an investor's attention when they get so many emails, right? Not just get dismissed or pushed back. And then finally, the biggest question of all that we're focusing on today, which is, how do I get money to get traction when I need traction to get money, right? There's a circular problem that we've kind of experienced as founders. And the bad news is that it's only going to get worse. It's just getting started. Right now, this is a very recent article, a month ago. So Silicon Valley's share of venture capital expected to drop below 20% for the first time this year. We're not going back. It's going to become more distributed and a more globally competitive market for people like us. So the question is, what can we do? And there's some good news, which is that some founders, even some first-time founders, are successfully raising money, significant money, without any traction whatsoever. Asana did this, Zillow did this, Jet did this, Robinhood did this, SpaceX did this. All of them had zero traction, just a concept when they were able to raise funding. And then also I put in, not to put on equal measure by any means, but I put in my last company, Cladwell, we were able to raise pre-product. And then JumpDocs, the company that I'm running now, we got a term sheet for 1.5 million before, literally just on PowerPoint deck. And so I just want to very clearly state, this is possible. Right now, it may be different degrees of possible depending on the founder, but it is possible. People do write checks, significant checks, when you have very limited traction. And so that behooves the question of, how did they get around the response, you need more traction, right? This is the question. How did they do that? So very quickly, a quick analogy, and we're going to use a high school analogy. So let's say that you're a young man or a young woman who wants to get a prom date, right? So you maybe have been eyeing this girl across your Algebra 2 class, and you think now's the time, I'm going to do a promposal, which is a new thing. I did not do promposals. That shows my age. There were no promposals when I was in high school. But now you maybe make an extravagant effort and you ask the young lady or young man, hey, will you go to prom with me? And her response is, first off, super interested. Thank you so much for asking. Maybe get back to me in like 2 or 3 weeks. Maybe you could work out a little bit in the meantime to see if you're a little bit more attractive in 2 to 3 weeks. How would you feel if you received that feedback, right? You'd be insulted. That is an insult. She's essentially saying, I have a lot of optionality. I could go, I want to hang on to my optionality as long as possible. And I'm very confident that you have no optionality. So 3 weeks from now, you'll still want to go out with me, right? It's an insult. Now, I'll make one caveat to that. If she were to respond, I'd love to go. However, I'm a sophomore and my parents have said I'm not allowed to go to junior, senior prom until next year. That means you've pitched the wrong person, right? She's not appropriate for the stage that you're going for right now. And that's a legitimate response and is actually completely different. So I'd say if you're going to an investor and they say, come back to me in 2 years, I don't invest at this stage, that is a legitimate response. And you should just say like, great, I'll come back to you in 2 years. But if they say, come back to me and the window is less than a year, it is an insult. And I would say specifically what it, and you shouldn't take it, it's not meant to be an insult. But what they're essentially saying is I have optionality and I am confident that you will not be raising money in that period of time. Because if they thought you were, they wouldn't say, come back to me, right? And so the question is, what do you do when the girl does this or the young man does this and says, wait 2 or 3 weeks, what do you do? And we need look no further than your typical high school rom-com movie, right? Everybody knows what is the answer when the beautiful girl doesn't like you or says that she, is kind of teasing you but won't actually go out with you. What is it that we're supposed to do? Does anybody know? Anybody want to chat in here? What do we need to do to make sure that she likes us? I'm kind of curious if anybody knows. If you like movies as much as I do. Play music, this one. Yes, UT is exactly right. Get another girl, right? You have to, and the answer is pretty clear. If we look at most movies, you have to make him or her jealous, right? You need to find a nerdy girl or nerdy young man who perhaps is at your level, and then go and remove her glasses, take down her hair, and who knew that she was beautiful all along? And suddenly you're the envy of the entire class, right? This is what we need to do. Is we need to create some sort of signal of optionality, right? And so to make it, I think we've beaten this analogy into the ground. Let's say a different way of, instead of saying jealous, would be how do we create a sense of inevitability when you're fundraising, right? A sense that like, I'm going to have a date no matter what. So the question is, do you want to go with me or am I going to go with somebody else? And I would say, if you are looking to raise, the people who I've seen successfully raise in the past year, and the times that I've successfully raised in the past, it really comes down to a sense that the investors are confident that this is happening in a short period of time. And I would say we have to somehow give that sense of inevitability. And there are really two tracks you can go in terms of creating a sense of inevitability. And I would say one is the poker track and the other is the chess track. The poker track is bluff, right? Just act like an asshole. And who knows, maybe they'll think that it's inevitable that you're going to raise money. I personally would not recommend the bluff strategy. I think it's borderline immoral, often ends up being dishonest, and you end up getting exposed. It's a short-term game in a long-term world, because the truth is that we're all going to be founders of multiple companies, or I hope that many of us are seeing this as a lifelong pursuit. And so you don't want to be known as someone who's dishonest or a bluff. So instead, I want to say, okay, what are the tactical things that we can do to create a sense of inevitability that actually statistically shift the odds in favor? And so what are the things we can actually do, not just appear to do? They'll shift the odds in our favor. So I have 9 tips of what to do here. And as you can tell, this is a little bit more of a tactical talk as opposed to maybe a strategic or a system talk. I have an e-course that I've made free that I'll give you a link to at the end that actually walks you through how to create an investor process that I would say this would fill in the gaps of some of that. But I've given that talk with Centrifuge before. Frankly, I've got 2 hours of video content in that e-course that I think is probably going to do it better than I can do in the 30 minutes. Yeah, so I figured might as well do something that's a little bit more specific and try to aim this toward the 2021 zone as much as possible too, because I think some things have changed. So let's jump into these 9 tips that I have for creating a sense of inevitability. Can I get thumbs up real fast? Everybody feeling okay? Or before I get into this, are there any maybe quick questions or clarifications or terms that need defining or anything like that? I presented this to my son earlier today, who's 9, and he didn't understand half the words I was using. And I realized like, oh yeah, I need to define my terms better. Will the slides be shared later? Yes. Yeah. Anything else? Yeah. Somebody said FOMO. That's exactly right. Yep. All right. Cool. All right. Let's jump into it. 9 tips, and then we're going to try to knock this out in maybe 15 minutes, and then let's just do Q&A. I also don't have another meeting till 2, so I'm happy to stick around as long as people want to go. I really do want to be helpful here, and yeah, clear up as many questions as we can. So, all right, 9 tips to create a sense of inevitability. First off, let's focus on what you can do individually as a founder. Okay, so this is not as an organization. We'll cover that in a second. But what can you do as a founder to create inevitability? Number one thing that you can do, and this is really specific for Cincinnati founders. I've met with 300 founders in the past year from an investment standpoint or from a coaching standpoint. And this is the number one thing I'm seeing amongst specifically Midwest founders. You must master your field. And what I mean is the industry that you're in. And I'd say there's a specific pattern I'm noticing, which is people who are coming from, call it a P&G brand management background or something like that, or maybe a Kroger or something like that. They're coming from a specific industry and they have a new, cat startup, right? They weren't in pet stuff at P&G. They were in FemCare or something like that. And now they're like, but I have an idea about cats and I want to make an app for cats. And then they immediately start to build out the app and all this different stuff. But when you dig into their thesis, you realize these people are not in the top 1 percentile of people on earth knowing about this industry. And I would say that is a major mistake. We need to become, literally, you need to become the deepest expert in your industry. You need to be in the top 1%. It's a huge deal to do this. You know what, like as an example, I'll show you real fast. So we started this company, Jump Docs. So it's like, how am I spending my time right now with Jump Docs? I study for 1 to 2 hours every morning. And, oh, are we good? Okay. Somebody needs to go on mute, by the way. Let me just show you just a general idea real fast here. Let's see. These are literally textbooks that I'm reading on startup legal. I have 10 years of, as a founder, being exposed to legal stuff, but I'm not an expert. But literally, I mean, this is Startup Law and Fundraising for Entrepreneurs and Startup Advisors. This is an actual textbook that I'm working through on literally I need to be toe-to-toe with any lawyer I talk to, where I actually know in detail far more than that. There's a Startup Legal Guide, Strategic Entrepreneurism, Early Exits, and Venture Deals, which everybody should read Venture Deals just in general. That's not just for people who focus on legal, but you have to become a master in your field. And if you're not reading constantly on this, enough that you know different authors, you've spoken with different authors, and you even know the contradictions between different authors, and you have an opinion as to who's right, or maybe that both of them are wrong. This is incredibly important because once you start to interact with a VC who has an opinion on this, if you can go that deep, it creates a sense of like, this person's an industry expert. This person can do this. And you don't have to have a background from a career standpoint in this. I think Elon Musk is a good example. By the way, I recognize that SpaceX was initially founded by him and some friends. But I would say, yeah, I'd say that if you look at Elon Musk, he wasn't a physicist, right? He started PayPal. I think he double majored in physics and philosophy, but it was an undergrad, right? He studied physics to the point of becoming, very fluent with PhDs in physics, right? We have to become experts. We have to really study. If you haven't read the book, So Good They Can't Ignore You by Cal Newport, read that book. It helps inspire a little bit about becoming a little bit of really investing in mastery from here. So that's number one. Number two is join the startup world. So obviously you need to become very fluent in your industry. Second, the startups is an industry. And being a startup founder is a life, it's a life trajectory. And there are a lot of us that are talking to each other regularly. Whether that's through, I've got a mastermind group that if anybody wants to join for Cincinnati founders as well as kind of the surrounding area, we've got a free mastermind group. We get together once a month and we solve each other's problems. Get on Twitter, like on Twitter, startup Twitter, although there's a lot of memes about it, it is where founders are at and VCs are at. And you need to develop the empathy and the context of what it's like to be a founder as a whole, or the macro sense, not just as the personal sense. And you need to kind of say, I'm in this game for the long term. You could even, if you're not raising money, you can even go into like the bootstrapping, like the, some of these bootstrapping communities. And then also, I mean, even Clubhouse, as long as you validate that they're legit, Clubhouse has a lot of new communities popping up, but you've got to just kind of commit to like, I'm a founder, I'm going to go hang out with other founders, I'm going to hang out with VCs, and I'm going to become part of that world. That will make you feel like an insider. And being an insider means like, okay, people who are insiders typically will have a sense of inevitability. I think it's very tempting to not do that because it feels like a distraction, but it's a long-term game. It really is helpful. And then finally, personally as a founder, you have to have both a strategy and a plan. And I'm pretty specific on what I mean by strategy is use the Startup Canvas. If you Google Startup Canvas, you can also, I mean, you can do a formal executive summary, but I don't think it's as helpful as just like a Startup Canvas. Even a pitch deck is pretty helpful, but you need to cover who's my customer, what's their problem, how's my product uniquely different from anyone else out there, at least at 1, 2, 3 levels different, right? What's my unique value proposition? How big is the market and how fast is it growing, right? Who else is in this and how is there space amongst my competition so that I'm not going to be going to war with them, because war is incredibly expensive, right? So how have I created some level of space versus them? I feel like we need to have it. If you look at the Startup Canvas, I think it's most elegant just because each of those pieces connects and interacts with each other. And so at any given time with the startup that I'm working on, I'll have maybe 5 canvases going simultaneously of different ideas of where this thing could be going. But you need to be thinking at a strategic level, not just like get a picture of a solution and then be like, how do I build it? How do I build it? You need to be constantly tweaking, how do these different elements of my business interact with each other? Does that make sense? Can I get some head nods? Yeah. So that's the strategy. Secondarily is you need to have a plan, which is specifically, if I get this money, how am I going to spend it? And not just how am I going to spend it, but what result will that get me? And you need to make sure that that result that you get, how much money you'll be making or how many customers you'll have or what level of product you'll have when that money has run out is sufficient to gain more funding, right? Because otherwise there's this risk of raising too little. I'd say the classic one is a founder who says, hey, I'm raising $200,000 or $300,000 and then I'll be profitable. I hope that's true. I've not seen that be true. Most of the time when people say that, it means that they're building a bridge to nowhere and they haven't raised quite enough money to actually get traction to raise a larger round. And now it feels like you get kind of in this half-baked stage where you're kind of raising half rounds constantly. I know that because I did that. I've raised, I mean, while we were here in Cincinnati, I mean, we raised 6 rounds of $500,000 or fewer. It sucked. It was horrible. You finish raising and then just enough time to raise more. And so you really need to kind of count the cost of what am I planning on spending? And at the end of that, will I be at the next kind of level, if that makes sense. I cover that a little bit more in my e-course. I know there's a lot of context around that one. Yeah, so those are the kind of the 3. 1, master your field. 2, join the startup world or community. And then 3 is have it both a strategy and a plan, right? And if you're, as a founder, if you're doing those 3 things, you've already set yourself apart in the top third of founders. There's a lot of chaff out there. And so I'd say this increases your inevitability. Okay, next let's talk about as an organization. As an organization, there are a couple things. You've got this strategy, you've got this startup canvas. And on there are assumptions, right? And some of those assumptions represent things that or you're making is a hypothesis, but you have no proof. A good one for me was my initial startup canvas for Jump Docs was lawyers will pay us, I think it was like $250 per month. Lawyers will pay us $250 per month per company. That was my assumption. So we took that and said, that's risky. I've only talked to one lawyer. That was David Wilbrand, and he said he'd pay me, but I wonder if anybody else will. So what do? We created a list of lawyers that had startup practices in the top 30 markets, and I've talked to 35 of them. And literally just reached out cold or had friends introduce me. And I talked to each one and described what we're working on and said, this is what we're thinking for pricing. How does that sit with you? And guess what? None of these lawyers want to pay me a monthly cost per company because I'm competing with their lake house. These partners within law firms, they're essentially, I'm taking out of their distribution. So then we were like, well, maybe startups will pay us a little bit less, but maybe startups would pay us. And so what do? We went and we talked to startups, and I got pre-dollar commitments where they said, yes, I will pay you a monthly amount for this thing. This sounds like amazing, right? So I got actual commitments where I even collected credit cards. This is pre-product. It was just on a keynote deck. But I essentially de-risked that who's your customer. I had no traction. Nobody paid me anything. I had no product, but I had presented just wireframes on a keynote and gotten dollar pre kind of sign up commitments. I also got lawyers to commit to using it despite they wouldn't be paying it. So they became the channel, all right? And so I've de-risked now both channel as well as both customer, right? So when you look at that startup canvas, you need to always be asking yourself, what is the riskiest thing in front of me? And what can I do without spending money to de-risk that area? Until you got to a point where you're like, I don't know what else I can do to de-risk it. I'm confident that this thing is true, right? Then you put it in front of some investors and find out how confident you are. Does that make sense? Does that feel good? Okay. So two, as an organization, you definitely, the primary work in front of you is removing the risks of the strategy. Two, I'd say is, I see people popping up in chat. I just want to see, is there anything I can answer here? Cool. You know what, I'm going to answer these later. I feel like it's hard for me to jump back and forth. All right, two is we need to be about the business of collecting shiny things. What I mean by collecting shiny things is that shininess really matters when you're going out and raising money. An example of a shiny thing is you have Kim Kardashian as an advisor and you're in the beauty space. That is very shiny. You probably can raise a seed round of funding just with that shiny thing. She's giving you no money, right? And like it's not even a transaction. It's kind of a point of traction in that she's an advisor, but just the association of that's a shiny thing. I'd say that who's done that really well, the guys at Listener, Rodney at Listener is incredibly good at collecting shiny things, right? I mean, the guy had Nas as an early partner. He's always like, you know, TechCrunch, there's a lot of buzz, there's a lot of PR, there's a lot of hype, and those are shiny things, right? You can also have other shiny things, like it's just like celebrity investors. You could have celebrity customers. You could have big brand name customers who are piloting but not paying you. All of these things are things that signal shininess. They're not technically traction in that they may not be paying you, but they're shiny. And the more you can collect those things, the more people say, okay, you're starting to kind of fit the mold that I envision in my mind of a startup that's going to raise. You know, people who have Kim Kardashian as an advisor, those people raise money, right? And so those are the types of things you can be looking for. It sometimes, I think, feels beneath us as founders, or it feels like, I don't know, it feels like a game that maybe some of us don't like to play. But the truth is that it's actually demonstrating a skill, which is that can you generate momentum as a person? And if you are the type of person who can generate momentum, that's actually a skill that has a high sense of success in startups. And so you're actually demonstrating that, and that's why those people have a sense of inevitability about them. And then also co-founders is very much a shiny thing. If you can get a co-founder with really deep experience, that's very shiny. And then last, as an organization, you do need to prepare legally. And specifically, I can go down the list. I mean, this is a lot of what we're doing with Jump Docs, and I'm not meaning to try to sell from the talk, but it is really important no matter who you use. If nothing else, reach out to a startup lawyer. Rob McDonald's great. David Wilbrand is my favorite. And Vance Van Drake is great. Like there's a bunch of these different folks, but and they can even give you a checklist of what to do before raising. I think they'll do that for free. Or reach out to us at Jump Docs and we can do that. But specifically, if you're going to raise institutional money, you have to be a Delaware C Corp. If you're an LLC, the problem is from a tax standpoint, you have to give tax documents. The problem is that most venture capitalists are also LLCs. So that means they have to give their LPs all the tax documents, and they don't want to do that. The purpose of the venture capitalist is actually to protect the family office from the tax burden. And so it's pretty important that you actually hold the tax burden within you as the Delaware C Corp. So that's one. Two is you need to make sure that you have all of your founder agreements in place, specifically when it comes to intellectual property. I have two friends who are in litigation right now because they didn't have good founding documents with friends of theirs who were co-founding. And what ends up happening is that you end up breaking up. And then what happens is like, who owns the idea, right? Did we all give the idea to the C Corp? That's what you're supposed to do. Or did you think, this is still mine and now I need you to pay me something now that I'm leaving, right? Same thing with vesting when it comes to the actual shares. You need to make sure that you're all vesting in together over the course of 4 years, not getting it all up front. The list kind of goes on. And I would say get an early stage startup lawyer. Specifically, I think David Wilbrand's great at doing this at a very economic or even free at times to work with folks through this. But if you show up to raise money, and you're not prepared legally, if you collect the money, you're actually going to spend all of it back on fixing legal mistakes that you are making. Or if you don't collect the money, you're just going to kind of look like a noob. And if you actually are ready to cash it, you're going to have to spend a bunch of money to fix it. Those things you can do as an organization. And last, things you can do as you raise in the raising process. And I cover this. This is the majority of what we do on the eCourse side. But number one is you have to have a really wide funnel. And not just wide, it also needs to be in parallel. So my general rule of thumb is you need, for every $10,000 you want to raise, you need to pitch one investor. So if you're looking to raise $1.5 million, you need to pitch 150 investors. But it's not enough to pitch them over the course of a year, 150. You need to be at a cadence of at least 10 investors per week. And by shoving them parallel like that next to each other, it will give you a sense of inevitability. It makes each pitch not feel so high risk. And so as you're moving them all kind of side by side, it's the only way of generating leverage for you is that you're entertaining multiple people at the same time. It also will give you a sense of you'll be so tired of giving your pitch that people will be able to tell that you've truly mastered it. They'll tell that you're not searching for words. And it actually makes you look more formidable, which I think is very important. One addition to this is the part of you also need to go deep, which is using that mastery that you have from studying your industry incredibly well. If you start to research and read Medium posts or blog posts from VCs who are deep experts in your space, and what you can do is you can start a long-term conversation with those VCs from a strategic level. And so, good example. For us, there's a guy from Cowboy Ventures who is deep. He's a lawyer, had a legal practice and then became a VC, is writing out all the different problems that are in law startups right now, and has, kind of listed those out and written multiple articles about it, and even done open calls. Like, anybody working on this, please reach out to me. So of course I reached out to him, and we've been emailing back and forth. Right. And it's not like I'm trying to get money from him. I'm literally just trying to continue the conversation. But the odds of that person wanting to invest in me are incredibly high because we're going deep on this topic that we share together. So the way I kind of coach founders is you want to be reaching out, kind of spray and pray to general investors constantly. But then I'd say write 1 to 2 what I'm calling like love letters a day, where you're going deep, researching the background of the person, looking at, what is their experience, what companies are they invested in, what are the articles they've written about, and kind of continue that conversation with people. And I've seen that if you kind of balance between those two, that tends to help you separate from the chaff a little bit, especially in kind of post-COVID world where cold email is becoming a little bit more commonplace. That's new. About a year ago, cold emails was kind of frowned upon, but that's no longer the case. But you need to go deep. It needs to be personalized. 2 is, this is very short, have a script for your pitch deck. Actually write out word for word exactly what you want to say. And for me, I'm an auditory learner, so I write that out. It's about half the time I want to spend on a pitch because I want to be able to embellish. And then I listen to it on voice memo whenever I work out. And that's for auditory learners. For visual learners, just write it out and read it over and over again. It's important to have that because then you won't be reaching for those words that you don't have. You won't look like the shaky high school junior asking the girl to prom, you'll have a sense of confidence about you. It also keep you from getting confused, because when you're doing 6 to 8 pitches a day, you start to forget what you said to one person versus what you said to another. So you need that deck, you need that script to keep you on task. Don't read that script, by the way, as you're pitching. It needs to be from the heart, but you need to have it deep in your prefrontal cortex. And then last, this is real tactical, but I found that most of the founders I'm seeing have success right now who are first-time founders are backing their way into bigger rounds. And what I mean by that is they're collecting $20,000 to $40,000 checks from angels, from friends and family, from alumni of their college, from sorority or fraternity mates, and they're getting to that like $500,000 mark, backing it in with small checks, and then finding their lead to finish off the round with $1 million check. And that's a way of creating a sense of inevitability, because you actually collected cash. At this point, they're like, well, he or she's doing it. They're going all the way. And so you can back your way into these rounds. A way of phrasing that is it's like a party round is when you never have a lead and you literally back your way all the way in. But when you get to that final version where it's like, okay, either I'm going to have a lead or I'm going to fill it all in with friends and family or with angels, that those conversations start to feel very logistical. And so you're reaching out to, after you pitch a VC or a larger investor, you're reaching out to them and saying, hey, could you just give me clarity by the end of the week? At this point, I'm pretty sure we're going to be closing. The question is whether you want to take a big chunk or if you want a smaller check or if you're going to pass this time, but could you just let me know as soon as possible? The tone of that is so much more inevitable than, hey, would you be willing to hop on one more Zoom call so I can hear an update on where you're at, right? And I'd say that the juice is in the final pitches, those final pitches at the very bottom. And I'd say that's maybe one caution that I have. I've seen the people who weren't able to raise that I've worked with typically kind of give up about, it's almost exactly 75% of the way through. And it's that final 25% of the investors on the list that typically that's when you're at your best. And that's when you have that sense of inevitability. And so I'd say you have to continue all the way through and continue injecting tension, never go single threaded through that process toward the end. And that's where I see people actually closing. So, all right, cool. So there's the full checklist. We'll send this out to everybody. There's a good quote from my buddy, Matthew McConaughey. He's not actually my buddy. He says, want, don't need, right? We don't have a sense of need about us, right? So next steps, go to allsmith.org, which is my website. And on the contact, you hit contact us, just select that you want to join the monthly founder mastermind. We actually have that tonight at 5. And so if I can, I'll try to add you the invite. I just want to make sure there's only founders on that. If you're trying to sell stuff to founders, I will not allow you in. But besides that, it's open to all founders. 2 is you can select that you want to get the free e-course. I have a coupon code that I'll send over to you and you can have it for free. That was, I would say, an abysmal failure at trying to monetize this knowledge that I have, because it turns out that nobody wants to pay you when they're trying to go get money. Who knew? But I'm happy to give it away for free. And I spent a lot of time on it, a lot of effort into it, and has a bunch of tools, including like a CRM and all this different stuff. And then finally, if you are interested in getting fundraising coaching when you're ready to raise like an actual institutional round, reach out to me. I've got 1 slot available right now. We're in due diligence with 2 companies right now, and I think we'll probably close this month. So I'll have another 2 available next month. Yeah, I'd say, and I think the forum's working on my website. If it's not, just email me at blake@allsmith.org, and I'm happy to give you all this stuff. I don't know. I enjoy working with people who are here. I'm still here, and I feel like it's a cool thing that we're doing, and it's all about growth personally as well as an organization, and I find that very motivating. So with that, let's do Q&A, and like I said, I'm happy to hang around. So let's do it.
No, it's good. Thanks, Blake. That was fantastic. So again, for those of you who joined while Blake was talking, I'm Eric Weissman from Centrifuge. Thank you again for joining our startup series. We will make the deck available, this recording available, so all that stuff you don't need to write too feverishly. But I did collect a couple questions in the chat, and we'll just go over those. And then if anybody wants to either put more in the chat, that'd be great, or use the raise hand feature on Zoom, and we'll get to you. So one of the first ones, Blake, was about why is joining a community so important? And there's a corollary to that. How do you do that while you're holding a full-time job? And I think that you know, we're trying to do over the past several years with Startup Cincy is evidence of that, to be evergreen, and whether you're in an accelerator, want to be in an accelerator, there's a thread going. But I wanted to hear your comments on that community component.
Yeah. Why? So first, why? You need to become a person like the people that are successful in your trajectory, right? And the way to become like those people is not to listen to those people teach, it's to be around those people. It's a contagion. So we need to catch founderness. And the only way to do that is to be around founders. So obviously friendship is a great way to do that. And I have a lot of founder friends, and if people are reach out, and I'll be your friend, and I also can introduce you to a lot of founder friends, but we need to be friends with one another. I don't think that's necessarily going to talks like this. Going to talks like this is part of like more about mastery, I'd say. It's learning, but community is actually about friendship, which means vacationing with, playing with, hanging out with. I was just hanging out with another founder yesterday, skateboarding at lunchtime, because I like to skateboard and I like startups. And so I skateboard with people who like startups. And so I feel like we just need to you're going to become the people that you're around. And so part of the game is you've got to get into it. So ways to do that, I'd say the most easy ways to do it is join like the Startup Cincy Slack channel. There's I think Rye Walker put together a Cincinnati Founders Twitter group within there. And so I'd say like get on Twitter and start following, just for starters on Twitter, follow Andreessen Horowitz, and follow like Ben Horowitz, Mark Andreessen, follow Pete Blackshaw, like follow like just anybody that you know in the scene, whether they're investor or founder, follow those people. And what you'll see is all the people who are commenting, what they're saying are a lot of the people who are like you. And then follow those people and get into those conversations and really participate as a human, not trying to promote yourself, but just like you need to catch founderness. Does that help? Does that feel good? Okay. Cool.
Yeah, I think so. Then the corollary to that was, how do you do that while having a full-time job?
You're already on social media, so just don't stop watching people redesign their kitchens and start watching people who are building startups. You have time.
Okay. So now to Keisha, you had a question. Thank you for raising your hand. Make sure that your mic is unmuted here, but there you go. You can.
Hello, my name is Takesha. Thank you so much for this talk. My question is, I am in the very beginning stages of learning about business and startup and finances in general, and it kind of feels like I'm jumping into something that's already been way started and I'm way behind. So it's helpful when you say to get surrounded by that knowledge, get yourself immersed. But is there a place where you can really begin, where you don't feel like you're always 10 steps behind when you start? What's your thought on that? Thank you so much.
Yeah, that's a good question. No, I don't think there is a place. I think part of our journey is to be 10 steps behind. And so maybe I would just reassure you that's how we all feel. Like we're all 10 steps behind constantly. And that's the journey of like, that's why nobody wants to be a founder, like, right? Or very few of us end up becoming founders, is because it's an embarrassing job of feeling like an idiot most of the time. And I feel like an idiot. But I have a picture over here. I signed a document 10 years ago that said, I have no clue what I'm doing. And I'm scared to death. Lord, please help me. And Tim Brunk and I signed this document because we met all these founders who seemed they seemed super confident. And I was like, have they always been that confident? Were they always like that? And the truth is like, no, most of them aren't confident now either. Like it's just this kind of like mess. And so generally what I found is reading general business advice I have found to be less helpful than get really specific of what problem am I trying to solve right now on my business? And let's just learn about what's most relevant right now. Because the hyper focus, because of its urgency, you'll get through it faster. As opposed to if you kind of learn about startups as a whole, it's a lot. I think it is, it's too overwhelming. I would say one exception to that is read founder biographies. The guy from SEO Moz, I think it's Lost and Founder was the name of his, I think. That's a great one. Ben Horowitz's The Hard Thing About Hard Things. Those kind of provide some general things, but they're in narrative form. And I'd say that's probably the best general education you can get. And then I would say focus your study time and your learning time on, well, I guess I have to form an entity today. What's an entity, right? Like it's like, okay, what's a Delaware C Corp? Why is that, right? And like learn on whatever's the next step. Cool. What else?
Great. I would add to that. I would add to that that we that are on this airplane that is flying, thousands of feet in the air, we don't realize how fast we're moving. But to the outside world, just understand that that there's a way to get on that plane. Even though it may not look like it from the outside, but it's events like these and what we're trying to do throughout the community to really remove those barriers to entry, lower those inhibitions and demystify things a bit so that you don't feel intimidated because, as Blake said, we're all just figuring this out. And don't be fooled by somebody who pretends to know all the answers. Another question was how much risk is there for an investor to take your idea to someone else? Like how much should we be concerned about? Well, I don't want to tell anybody this because they're going to go off and do that without me.
Zero. Like zero. I feel like it's so hard to do this. Like I don't know, it's so hard to actually make a startup. And so I never worry about someone else executing my idea. I will say my pitch deck was definitely circulated to my competition regularly. And so I'd say that's a more common experience. And that's why I'd use like what's the Slido or what's the other one? There are a couple slide sharing things that you can essentially require a password for people to look at your pitch deck. That's probably a good idea because people will sometimes share your confidential information. I would expect that anything in a pitch deck that you send to somebody is going to get passed around. But in terms of actually your idea being stolen, ideas are worth next to nothing. It's all about execution. And don't force people to sign non-disclosure agreements. It's a signal that you don't know.
That seems to be something in
the vibe
chat.
is. Yeah. The vibe of startup founders is we never ask each other or ask investors to sign NDAs. It's a signal that you don't know this world.
Great. Next question, the importance of staying local for your investors. The question from someone possibly overseas looking to say, should they reach out to investors in the USA while the startup is based in London, or should you stay local? And I'm just spinning that up to saying, what's the importance of having local advocacy and investors on your side first?
I mean, I'd say if you have a better hit rate with people who are local because of your reputation or your last name or your association, great. But I would not limit it to a locality in order to increase your odds. I'd say the wider the net, the better. Specifically to the London one, I think you'll have to be a Delaware C Corp in order to raise money in the US. And so I think there's some legal parameters that you need to consider because I think investing in foreign entities is a little bit more complex. So just make sure you know the answer of what hoops they need to jump through. But I know that like at 500 startups, the majority of the startups that were there with me, like cohort mates, were from outside the US and they all created US entities. So I'd say if you're going to raise in the US, you probably need to have an entity. I would say generally, yes, you're going to want to raise in the US. There's more venture capital here and more angel investors for that matter.
Great, thanks. Don't forget, people use the raise hand function. We'll call on you and unmute the mic. Got one more here. How much traction, like when we're talking about proof of concept, and I know you went through this a little bit more earlier, but talk about traction maybe from a user standpoint and not so much an investor standpoint.
For seed stage venture cap. So if you're seed stage venture capitalist, if you're going to raise like a $1.5 to $2 million round, I would say you actually do need to have industry specific traction that is necessary. And so if you have literally nothing and you're trying to raise 1.5 to 2 million, unless you're a second time founder or have a celebrity co-founder, like some really shiny thing, you're probably gonna have to spend a little money or bootstrap your way to get a little bit of traction. That's normally, if you're B2B, let's say you need to have at least $10,000 to $20,000 of monthly recurring revenue. If you're B2C, it would be really helpful if it's free to have over 500,000 users. 500,000 to 1 million users would be helpful. If you're a marketplace, I think there's a certain amount of GMV that's necessary. Like most of that is specific to the vertical that you're in, but I'd say there are hurdles there. However, if you're talking to angel investors, you can collect a check on a PowerPoint deck. And a lot of angel investors are acting more like VCs, and that's okay. That's not the angel for you. But a lot of angel investors will still invest pre-product, and you should be going after those. Also, industry experts who maybe haven't done a lot of angel investing, but can see your mastery. They're a good place to go, as well as friends and family. But one caveat to all this, we didn't even talk about the big question is like, should you be raising money, period? If it's physically possible for you to create this startup without raising investment, do it. Like investment is the worst way to grow your startup. But you should only be doing it if it's physically impossible to grow your startup or to win without it, right? So if you have a big, well-funded competitor that's going to destroy you unless you raise, that's a great reason to raise venture capital, right? If you have a market that it can't grow itself, it only works at scale, great reason. But if you just like, it would be easier if you had money, don't. It's a bad idea. And we shouldn't be celebrating people who raise venture. We should be celebrating people who build companies.
Great. So I know that we're running up against 1 o'clock. We can keep this Zoom going, but I wanted to officially thank everyone for attending. I want to thank Blake for his time. There will be a follow-up survey. Would appreciate everybody's feedback on that. And I put a link in the chat of the future startup series events coming up. So if you like this one, hopefully you get a lot out of it. Keep an eye on that space for future ones. Next question, Blake. How much are VCs thinking about exit strategy when you give your initial pitch?
Sorry, I muted myself. VCs know the exit strategy. It's to go public. That's plan A, right? Plan A should always be to go public because that's the biggest return you can get. We don't even need to talk about it to VCs. Plan B would be you get purchased, which is kind of like what we ended up doing. And I'd say that that's a lesser outcome. That's less exciting. It's better if you can go public. If you're an angel, if they're an angel, now you have a lot of people asking about exit strategy, and they're going to want to know how this works. And some of it's going to have to be education of what do you actually want to do. If you are thinking, I'm going to pay out dividends and distributions, and we're going to all kind of make this a good life of getting cash flow from it. That's not venture track, but that's still a legitimate track. You need to stand by whatever you intend to do with the business and communicate that really clearly. And don't promise different things to different people like I did. I essentially just gave people the exit strategy they wanted to hear, and then realized that I actually kind of had hamstrung myself and had to back up and suddenly be like, well, what is it that I really want? Because essentially I was just saying yes in order to collect some checks, and not a good idea. What else?
Looking. Another question about the startup community and incubators and you know, are those incubators, and I would add accelerators in there. Are those accelerators looking for incubators looking for only companies that are seeking funding? And if Anthony Seppi is paying attention, I know he's on the call here, not to put him on the spot, but you can give a plug for HCDC while Blake is answering.
Do you want to go first? Or we should talk?
There he is.
Yeah, no, I'll answer that. No, we will certainly work with companies that are not looking for funding. I mean, that's, you know, we have actually a pretty good majority of our companies are not going down that funding path. So they're looking to bootstrap, they're looking to build their customer base, and, you know, we're more than happy and willing to help them, you know, through that journey. So absolutely, if you're not going down that path. You know, there's no requirement that says you've got to be going down that path to work with an incubator or an accelerator. So
I would say from an accelerator standpoint, you need to, you should be only you should want to go to the top 5 accelerators in the world. Like you should be shooting for them. Right. So it's Techstars, it's Y Combinator, it's 500 Startups, it's Launchpad. I don't know who's 5th. But you want to go for the top 5. And if you can't get into top 5, then you need to go into top 2 in your specific vertical. So it's like if you're in retail, then you'll do like the Target Accelerator in Minneapolis because they're like #1, right? They're not #1 globally, but they're #1 for that specific vertical. And so if you're kind of applying to this kind of like 2nd or 3rd or 4th tier accelerator, I think you're doing yourself a disservice and I wouldn't recommend it. I think that in general, accelerators are getting smarter about getting really specific to a vertical if they're not in a top 5 general sense. Because I think otherwise there's a problem from a signaling standpoint that if you're in a 2nd or 3rd or 4th tier accelerator, you're getting associated with somebody who's actually going to hurt your reputation versus help.
Great. David, you had a question?
Yeah, I wanted to follow up to that. For example, with what I'm working on, I'm considering doing an incubator mainly due to some of the contacts it could get me as I look at being able to flush out my market further and reach contacts that are, CFO level and others that would help me to be able to make me look more shiny, right? So I could say I've worked with so many, or maybe I have letters of intent, and then look at going to something like Techstars or 500 Startups. Is that something that you would recommend? Does that seem like a valid way to move forward and incrementally reposition myself to a better position? Or what are your thoughts on that?
If you can't do it without the incubator or accelerator, then yeah, I guess it's the only path you have. But if it's physically possible for you to do it without them, it's better to not give up the cap table. And generally what I've seen is that accelerators aren't great at introductions because they have to make the introductions for everyone. And so generally, if it's a generic introductions, like it's hard for them to lend their opinion because they have to raise funds and they have to maintain their reputation. That being said, I would say if it's specific to a vertical, so Sheesh was on here earlier. He went to like the #1 age tech accelerator in New Hampshire. It's the #1 in the US. They made a lot of introductions for him that were incredibly, like they were priceless. And his being accepted in there was a big deal in the age tech world. So I would get very specific to your market. And I'd say if that's the case, yeah, do it. Absolutely. And then layering that into then going to a top tier accelerator. Sure, but I would shoot for just skipping the top tier and just going straight to raising a seed round, ideally. Stacking accelerators is not a great look. Generally, it's not the end of the world, but I'd avoid it if possible.
Thank you.
Yeah. What else? There's one question I'm waiting for that I haven't got yet.
Who does your hair? Is that it?
About my hair? Oh yeah, at the beginning of the presentation, I started with hair. Yeah. No, I guess I'll talk about it. What about if you're a woman or a woman of color or a person of color? And how do you deal with the fact that statistically less than 1% of venture capital is going to go to you if you're a minority? What do we do about that? And I've dealt with this because some of the folks that I've coached have had to face this. And so to that, I would say a couple things. One, you will experience, there are things, you will experience some unfair treatment or some weird questions and some, I'd say some ignorance in the process. You will. Also, at least amongst the VCs that I know, you have better odds right now than a white dude. And a lot of amongst certain VCs. And the reason for that is because a lot of them are saying, hey, we're trying to become leaders of industry change. And so I would say for every racist, sexist, there's actually an equivalent who's actually saying, I am actively looking for more deals. So I'd say you actually have an advantage with them. That's not to diminish the fact that there are some weirdos over here, but there also are some people who are really awesome. So, so what do you do with that reality? And the phrase that I've given to my folks is, after every negative interaction you have, ask yourself this question: what if that person is not racist? Or what if that person is not sexist? And I want you to ask that question. And the reason for that is they may be, and that's the truth. But that discovery is going to be unhelpful to you. As opposed to if you say, what if they're not racist, or what if they're not sexist? Then you have to examine your business and examine yourself and say, what can I improve? So then you're going to be taking negativity, whether it's negativity that's legitimate negativity, because that is the job of a VC, is to be negative on you and your business. That's their job. They say no 99% of the time. But you can take that and then leverage that to become stronger and to become better. And so that's the approach that we're trying to take. And I think it's not to dismiss that there are massive disparities. That is true. But I think the most actionable thing you can do is essentially always ask the question, what if I'm misinterpreting, and what if this is not racism or sexism? What if in fact there's a legitimate thing that I can do to improve and strengthen? And so in the face of that negativity, you'll receive more negativity most likely, and that means you're going to end up being stronger. And so, yeah, I feel like that's an important one that I've had to deal with actually very recently with a couple founders that I'm working with. And we've kind of had to process that. Yeah. What else?
That's great. I think that's a great. I wish Christine Fisher were still on, but she works for POSSUP, and Shani is kind of famous for, her co-founder is famous for raising the most money in Tennessee for Black female. So Christine's perspective on that would have been welcome. But I appreciate. And I agree with your seesaw, right? For everybody that's looking in that direction, there's another counter to that, like Lightship Capital right here in Cincinnati with Candace and Brian Burkeen, who are looking for underrepresented funders exclusively.
Yes.
One more question here, two more actually. Any importance that the investor weighs on whether they would personally be a consumer of the product? How much importance does that weigh?
Way too much importance. Like way too much importance. My last business, the primary customer were millennial women. And guess who made most of our investment decisions? It was VC's daughters or their wife. They'd be like, this is cool. I hear all the statistics you just gave me, but let me take this back to my wife. And so a lot of investments ended up being made based on that. And so I vowed, if I ever raise venture capital again, I'm going to make a company that's consumed by venture capitalists. I'll make like a Patagonia vest competitor or PitchBook competitor, something like that, because absolutely there's personal experiential bias within there. So the way to get around that is by telling specific personal stories of your consumer. That is fairly obvious that they're not that consumer, but then they can see, they can empathize on a narrative of who your actual customer is. Makes sense.
Is it fair? Next question. Is it fair to say that pre-product, you should be looking at angel investors as opposed to venture capital investors as pre-product?
I think you should pitch everybody, but I think you should expect angel investors, yes. But that being said, there always are exceptions to the rule depending on the level of inevitability that you have and you're able to garner. There are a lot of instances of, Peter Pham, who's from Science Incorporated, who coached me, he raised $40 million pre-product. But he also had a couple exits under his belt. So it's possible, but I'd say, yeah, I would expect most likely it's going to come from angels if you're pre-product. I'm
reminded of Mark Suster, who said that he invests in lines, not dots. So from a VC, you need to keep talking to them. They may not invest at that dot, but if they want to see that progression, they're going to invest in that line of where that trajectory goes. One more question. This is more community oriented. How do startups find each other, partner, or go alone? And some questions around tech talent or development help. What are your suggestions there of how to literally make those connections?
Yes. Systemically, the problem is that most of our first-time founders have never worked for startups. That's the systemic issue that we're facing as a community. If you had worked for a startup before you started a startup, you would know all the engineers from that startup, and so you would be able to pull them in with you. That's how it works generally. The problem is that we have a lot of people coming from Kroger, coming from other companies who have never worked with startups before, so they don't know any engineers. And so the best advice I can give you is be friends with other founders, and they can introduce you to engineers, and to build friends. But this is going to be a long-term, like you actually have to augment your social circles, augment your friendships is kind of the best way to do it. It's a very dangerous thing. Like if you don't know anybody technical and you're not technical, that's one of the biggest risks that you're facing, is who's going to be that technical talent that you can, that you're going to bring on there. And so I'd say generally it's going to be a lot of trying to meet people. Some of it can be meeting people online. A lot of it's going to be like even like some of the like the weekend startup competitions. What's that called, Eric? The Chris Ryder, like the startup weekends.
Startup
That
weekend.
sort of stuff. That's a great way to do it. But it can't be. You can't be going into that trying to close a CTO over the weekend.
Mhm.
You have to say like, oh, I'm creating space in my friend group.
Yeah. Yeah, I like to say that it's a process, right? That you
Yeah.
can't just have one meeting and just go buy some magic beans and plant it, and all of a sudden I have a startup. You have to continue to make those connections, go to things multiple times, commit to those events to at least 3 times. Obviously, in the pandemic world, where we're kind of limited, we're getting out of that. So you see the same people, you hear the same things 3 times, you follow them on Twitter, you get to pick up some of that lingo. And then the second time you go to that meeting, you can refresh those connections. But it is a matter of networking and having that long-term vision.
Yeah. And yeah, I'd say there's someone on this call who's like still working a full-time job and thinking how
Yeah.
like, and that full-time job is not at a startup. And they're like, okay, how am I going to find a co-founder and all these different things? I'd say the biggest step you can take is quit that job and work for a startup, in opposite order. Get a job offer from the startup and then quit your job. But I feel like it's an iterative step that a lot of people are trying to skip in our community specifically, is we're forgetting that you can work for startups. And if you work for them, even if your goal is 3 years from now to leave that startup and then found your own, a great first step is to go work for a startup.
I agree.
It'll,
That's a
yeah,
great plug.
gives you a network, gives you friends.
Mhm.
Cool. What else?
I think this is connected to what we just talked about from the ecosystem, but how do we foster intra-founder connections? So like you meet a founder that's like, hey, that's great, but this other person or this other organization, if you guys combined efforts, it'd be complementary. How do we foment that? Like putting 2 similar founders together.
Yeah, gmail.com is a great tool that I've found for trying to do that. Email them and say, hey, we should talk. I emailed the founder of Pulley. She just raised $10 million and it's a new cap table management software out of San Francisco. I emailed her and said, hey, I'm building something that needs software, cap table software, and I don't really want to build it. Do you think we should team up in some way? Like maybe I could integrate in with you, or you could integrate, and we just start talking about it. Like I'd say we should constantly be looking for ways that we can combine. PayPal being a good example of that, which is the combination of 2 companies.
Great. I think I caught them all, unless I missed any. Everybody want to jump in and remind me of what I've missed? But yeah, anyone. Thanks everybody again. Blake, any last words that you thought? Oh, David had a good question. Sorry, let me find it. Oh, how did he get so many meetings with VCs?
Yes. Yeah, it's administratively a huge burden to do this. So the process that there's kind of 2 different processes you can take, but I would encourage you to do both. One is to start with a list. So you got to create a list of all the VCs you want to talk with. And the best way to look at that is look at your industry, who's non-competitive in your industry, that you could say, great, all those investors could also invest in my company. and they already know my industry enough that they would be interested. Second is someone who's maybe a good analogy to your company from a business model standpoint, but is in a different industry. So essentially that's easy to, they'll catch on like, what they did for ride sharing, you're doing for pets, right? And like, it's like they can create the analogy easily, go through those investor lists using AngelList or Crunchbase, and then find that. And so now you've populated a list of 50 to 100 VCs. Now you've got a list of people, but you don't know how to get to know them. Go onto each of their LinkedIn. Also, I have a admin who's been doing this for a lot of my friends. If you want to talk with her, I don't take a cut, but she actually has become an expert on this. Of like, if you give her a list of VCs that you want to talk to, she can take that, find the different partners, find out how you're connected to them through LinkedIn, and then you can essentially ask for a warm introduction. Or if not, then we have some tools that she uses to find their email address, so that then you can craft a cold email. So that would be one way. The other way is if you know a lot of founders, you email people like me and say, hey, this is what I'm working on. Who are 3 VCs that you know that would love this idea? And so I already have a network, and I would love to introduce people if it's a good fit, right? And so if you take those 2 routes, I've seen people get to that 100 to 150 VC meetings through that. But I would say it's a big administrative lift, and you're going to get real comfortable with cold outreach and feeling like a weirdo.
Just my personal experience with that is the Oros team. You remember them? They had the outerwear. They had what I think is one of the best. It's their own due diligence, but they had a wish list of investors that they wanted to hit, investors that they saw that were in that industry. They asked for our help with kind of rounding that out, but it was really impressive of the research and the homework that they had done. They moved the company eventually to Oregon to be closer to the outerwear sports apparel world, but that was because of the diligence and the almost market intelligence that they just consumed. One more question. How do businesses and founders credit history? How does that affect fundraising?
Oh, interesting. I don't think anybody's ever asked for credit history. I don't think I've ever had anybody ask for credit history. It'll be, I've had them ask for that when it comes to debt, like if you need to get a revolving credit facility. So as a venture debt will be harder to get based on that. But from a VC standpoint, I've never seen credit history affect anybody. You're muted, Eric.
Good, then you didn't hear me cussing when I realized I was muted. What about pay to pitch?
Oh, that's interesting.
What are your thoughts there?
How much do they charge? Like, how much are we talking?
Oh, hundreds of dollars.
Hundreds, like $500?
Yeah.
The value of that pitch is $10,000. So I would not say it's any more valuable than any other pitch. But if you're really struggling and you need another one, I mean, the value is 500. If it's only $500, I'd do it. But
I get you.
Yeah.
That's good. That goes back to that math, that equation that you said earlier of if for every $10,000 you are looking to raise, that's how many pitches you need to have.
Exactly. So I would not put them as any higher odds than anybody else. Yeah.
Okay, Cademan, over to you.
Yeah, hi, my name's Cademan Oaks. I am a senior in high school, and I am in this program called the Appalachian Entrepreneurship Academy. And one of the coaches lives in Northern Kentucky and saw this event, and she recommended it to all of the people in the academy. And unfortunately, I was the only one that was able to join today. But I thought that this was very helpful, and it would be very helpful for you, Blake, to come and maybe speak on one of our meetings that we have the whole team together. So what's a way that me and my facilitator could maybe like get in contact with you so that you could maybe talk to us about the same stuff that you talked about today?
I thought you were going to say, talk to us about how to get dates for prom.
Yeah, that too. No, I'm just
yes. Absolutely. I know I'd be happy to. If you just, here, how do I, in the chat? If you just go to allsmith.org, you can just reach out to me. It just goes straight to my email. or you can even email me at blake@allsmith.org. I'd be happy to chat with folks. I've had a lot of people chat with me, and it's been incredibly helpful. So I'd be happy to help out in any way I can.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Gaben. That's fantastic. One more question here. Does adding a co-founder make a difference in getting funding?
Yes. Depending on the business, I'd say it's less the co-founder, and specifically it's making sure that every area of the business has a deep expert at its head. Right. So in my last business, Cladwell, we had to have a head of fashion. We had to have some sort of head on the marketing side because we had to actually be able to get those people. And so you need to have somebody at the head to represent the core elements of your business. And so like, yeah, I'd say like freight would be a good example where they have a head of someone who knows the driver world in and out. And they also have someone who knows the retail world in and out of like who the retailers are selling to. So you need to make sure that you have someone who has deep expertise at every risk area of the business.
Cool.
Anything else?
I think we're doing good, man. Again, thanks for your time. Thanks for sticking around 20 minutes after your talk and for fielding all of these questions. Thanks everybody for joining and for asking questions, being interactive. It's been highly interactive, so that's always makes it more fun for an event like this. But anyway, appreciate everybody's time. Be on the lookout for that survey to come out shortly, and then I put the link in the chat for when our next where you can find all of our events, but when the next one is coming up. So thanks everyone. Thanks Blake. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you guys. I'll see ya.